The UN's climate change conference in Brazil is past the halfway mark, and this weekend, tens of thousands took to the streets of Belém, the host city located on the edge of the Amazon, demanding urgent action as negotiators continue to debate climate policy behind closed doors. Joining us now is Anabela Bonada, Managing Director of Climate Science at the University of Waterloo's Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. Anabela, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Nivrita.
We're heading into our second and final week of COP30, and I'm curious to know, before we talk about some of the specifics of this conference, how you're viewing what this year's conference represents. As someone who's spent years studying climate science, do you have thoughts about the location, these demonstrations, this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. The demonstrations are so significant because Brazil is known for the Amazon and for the incredible indigenous communities that live within the Amazon. And we heard before this COP30 just some of the destruction that was occurring to the Amazon in order to even hold this meeting, just creating roads, for example. And so there's a bit of a dichotomy of this meeting happening there. But what a lot of people don't know is that in order to host a COP, you have to be able to afford it. So it has to be a bigger city, a bigger economy. So some of the countries that should really be part of the conversation have to miss out from these meetings a lot of the time. And so the current demonstrations are super significant, especially because over the last couple of COPs, people weren't really allowed to go out and protest. So we're seeing those big indigenous voices out in Belém protesting some of the slow advancements that we're seeing with the climate targets that we have.
Yeah, the visuals coming out of the conference, of these demonstrations, they're quite significant. Huge turnout, the signs, the various equity groups that are represented out there, however, not inside, perhaps. There doesn't seem to be one big ticket item that we're looking for out of this COP. Perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong. We've already, gone into it a bit compromised, given the US is not participating, and they plan to pull out of the Paris Agreement entirely by January. Are you looking for any specific outcome?
The one positive is that they're really focusing on not coming up with anything brand new, but focusing on the targets that they've already set in place and implementing them. So that is a big message that's coming out, is we have the technologies, we know what kind of financing we need. We know that we need more adaptation. So adaptation's been a big one for this COP meeting. So they're really focusing on actually implementing all the promises that have been made over previous COPs. And I think that is quite commendable for this one.
How are you viewing Canada's role at this conference?
Canada has quite a big role, so they still show up. We still go to the conferences, and that's really important. As you mentioned, the US isn't even showing up. We have pledged almost $400 million towards funding for adaptation for other countries. It's quite a bit. Of course, there's more that's needed, but Canada's setting a real example. And they also did hold an Indigenous Leadership Day, for example, and that's been such a big part of this conference. So Canada's there to kind of show that we're present, we're here, we're still committed, and we can bridge some of the issues that are happening between other countries to help bring them to the table.
I'm curious, if you have any concerns about a potential shift in our domestic policies. This past week, the Prime Minister unveiled his second list of fast-track projects. It does include plans for a conservation corridor, but climate activists have raised a number of concerns with this big infrastructure push. Where do you come in on this?
There's a lot of concern right now in the climate change sector and climate adaptation. We did a lot over the last 10 years as a country towards climate change, but we need to be much more aggressive if we're actually going to slow down climate change and slow down the impacts that we're seeing across the country. This season was the second worst wildfire season for Canada. We're going to continue to see that if we don't do some real actions to slow down our emissions. My concern is that these large projects, which sure are necessary for Canada and our economy, that they're not taking into full consideration the impact in the long term. So while we do need this for the short term, we might be making things worse for our country in the long term when it comes to climate change. So both need to be taken hand in hand. If we're going to have these major projects, we need to consider the impacts that it's having on our climate and our communities.
All right, so we'll really have to see how that plays out as far as our domestic policies are concerned. As for COP30, I know you spoke about the adaptation, which, if I understand correctly, it means this shift in terms of technology, renewables. Could we speak for a second about the temperature target of it all? Because I'm seeing from reporting coming out of Belém that for the first time, maybe delegates at COP, they're publicly acknowledging that we're going to go past that 1.5 degree warming limit that was set by the Paris Agreement. What is the sense you have on negotiations or commitments we could see on temperature, on emissions reductions, which is, of course, closely related?
Yeah, we've been watching that 1.5 degrees Celsius since the Paris Agreement, and last year we surpassed that amount. So we actually warmed the planet by a little bit over 1.5 degrees Celsius. If that number becomes sustained over the next few years, that's when we'll see real impacts that we just can't turn back from. The number is shifting. So scientists across the world have been saying over the last year, it's really hard for us to hit that 1.5 degree target. So we might be closer to a 2 degrees Celsius. But all is not lost. We have the technologies in place. We know what needs to be done. Another commitment that's been made at Belém is Belém 4 times. So they're planning to have sustainable technologies, to have sustainable energy systems 4 times increased by 2035. And that could really help with the emission reduction across the globe. We've done a lot as humans to really have the technology in order to reduce our emissions. Now it's just about those commitments from countries to see that it's better for our economy in the long run. So just to add a little bit to that adaptation point, climate extreme weather has cost the world about $2 trillion just over the last 10 years. So investing in a greener future means reducing the cost for all of us.
Where are you seeing the leadership coming from when it comes to this transition? Would it be correct to say, because we know the US is absent, and even if they weren't, this is really not something that the US has been playing a leadership role in, at least based on previous climate conferences. Would it be correct to think that it's maybe China talking about this renewable technology?
China's been working on renewables for many years. It's something that's been working really well for them. So they are coming out as a bit of leaders. India as well are big leaders in this sector. There's a lot of renewables coming out of India. But a lot of countries are doing quite a bit. They're just not spoken of as much. So in Europe, countries have been working with this technology and having sustainable cities for a long time. They just don't have the landmass to sustain what we do here in Canada. And I do want to be clear that the US, even though as a country, they don't have great representation, different states are still doing their own climate goals and advancing some of these green technologies in order to bring better technologies to their country and train their people. So it's not US wide and it's not Canada wide either. There's still a lot that's being done. We just don't hear about the good news as much as we do about the bad news.
Yeah, I'm glad you make that distinction, because we did have Gavin Newsom actually attending the conference on behalf of the state of California, which itself is a massive economy. It could be a country in its own right based on the size of its economy. I wanted to get your thoughts on a final point. You might have seen these estimates that more than 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists are attending this year's conference, 1 in 25 participants. There is, of course, a history here. There's a long history of corporate interests co-opting the narrative around climate change. Is this something you worry about?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier on, to attend COP, you have to have enough money even to attend, to show up as a country, to send delegates, to be able to rent a hotel room. So a lot of people are being left out. And of course, fossil fuel lobbyists have that money and they're able to be there. They should be there. We should have everybody at the table, part of the conversation and part of the solutions, but everybody's not currently at the table. So we need to do much better with future COP meetings and making the space available for the countries that are feeling the highest impacts, like small island nations, like, for example, Pakistan, Jamaica, that just felt some of the biggest impacts from Hurricane Melissa. Those countries don't have the same space or amount of people or delegate at the table that they should for these conversations.
All right. Well, the conference concludes at the end of the week on Friday, but this work continues year-round, I'm sure. Anabela, thank you. We leave it there for now.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is Anabela Bonada of the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation.